Logic Pro for iPad has been out for 5 weeks now. Many of you have downloaded it. Many have tried the free month trial. Some folks love it. Some folks maybe don't love it quite so much. In this week's podcast, I'm going to be talking about the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between of Logic Pro on iPad. And what does it mean for GarageBand and the future of GarageBand, especially GarageBand on the iPad and iPhone? Speaking of GarageBand, what's that I hear? I think there's someone joining us on this week's show. In fact, it is the GarageBand guru himself, Patrick, from the GarageBand Guide. How you doing, my friend?
I'm very good, mate. How are you?
I'm exceptionally well.
Good.
Look, I know that 90% of people that are watching this and listening to this podcast know you and know who you are and what you do. But for the few folks that maybe don't, tell us what is the 30-second elevator pitch? You know, we both worked in corporate. What's the elevator pitch for the Patrick and the the GarageBand Guide?
The GarageBand Guide. Yeah, well, it's a website and YouTube channel that teaches beginners and intermediate users of Apple's beginner-friendly DAW on iPad and Mac how to use it and how to make great-sounding music using it.
Sounds like something that most folks around this area would be very much into. So yeah, if you haven't already subscribed, you haven't checked out thegaragebandguide.com or GarageBand Guide on YouTube, go ahead and do that. And we might have a bit of a special announcement later on in the show about maybe something new and something special. So that we call that a tease in the business. But we're here today to talk about Logic Pro on iPad because it's been pretty massive, as we mentioned. It's been out for 3 weeks now. No, 5 weeks, in fact. It's a whirlwind. I can't even get the numbers right. It's been out for a while. You and I were in the unique positions of having it a little early, so we were lucky enough to get a pre-release version from Apple to play around with. And how did you find the experience of having it and being announced and everyone else being super excited and not being able to say a single bloody word?
Well, we've been waiting for that announcement, or we have been waiting for that announcement for years, probably. I think the whispering started kind of 2020 that Logic Pro was coming to the iPad, and then we had to wait and wait and wait. So it was really, really exciting that it got announced eventually. Obviously, the tease that Apple had made it look really cool. Obviously, getting access to it early was great, as I'm sure you can agree. I'm sure you can also agree it was absolute blimmin' torture having to keep that under your hat for 2 weeks, especially when your audience and people in groups and forums were asking all kinds of interesting questions that you were in a position to answer, but you couldn't. So, yeah. Exciting and torturous in equal measure, I think.
Yeah, and I could feel you there because I was doing live shows. I do a weekly show called GarageBand Weekly, and folks were asking me all about it. They were like, "What do you think the presentation about this meant? I saw this one part of it that looks like this. What do you think that is?" And I'm like, "I can't say a single word, but I know exactly the right answer." So yeah, it did feel a bit awkward, but it was great, and it did mean that we were able to then immediately on day one start helping folks. And I know I've mentioned this to you before, but you were my support network because for those 2 weeks we were all each other had in terms of being able to talk about this stuff. And then on release day, I was up at 2:30 in the morning. You were releasing a video. I was releasing a video. We were coming out of the embargo land, and we could suddenly start talking about all of this stuff. And it was awesome there. So that was. It was an interesting time for sure, and I'm glad it's over.
It's not over yet, Pete.
It's not over yet. But the last 5 weeks, my friend. So we'll jump into that in a moment and talk about what our experience has been so far. A lot of the questions we've had from people in the community, and a bunch of other things. I did want to point folks towards the Logic Pro for iPad users group on Facebook. So you were really, really good out of the gates, and you jumped on the Facebooks and you created a Logic Pro for iPad users group. Now 1,500 members strong already in the first 5 weeks. And how have you been finding that? Lots of great conversations and questions and discussion going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been a part of, you may be familiar with this group as well. I've been part of an excellent GarageBand focused Facebook group for a few years now. So it just made perfect sense, having seen what a success and such a great community that group has been for users of GarageBand, to create something kind of similar for people who will be coming in and using Logic Pro for iPad. And so far, yeah, it's been great. There's not been any kind of issues or untoward likable people. I'm trying to just keep it very clean for you, Pete. And yeah, obviously you're a moderator there as well. You can see yourself. There's a horrendously or a massive audience of people coming in every single day who are wanting to learn about this app. So
absolutely, no, it's been excellent, and yeah, I remember that on day one I said, Patrick, that's a bloody marvelous idea, and well done. And I saw you as the admin, and then I saw how many people were joining and how quickly. And as someone, because I was an admin of the GarageBand users Facebook group, and I remember reaching out to you and saying, would you like to be a moderator? Because there's people on the other side of the world that are requesting to join, and you kind of need a few folks that are on the different time zones, so when you're sleeping, you don't wake up to 100 people and 100 different moderator requests.
Which is what was happening. Yeah, it's exactly what was happening.
So hopefully, I know I haven't been able to help out as much as I possibly could have, but hopefully it's been helping a wee bit to be able to do that. So do join that if you are looking to check out Logic Pro for iPad and you're interested. And I did see an interesting, you put up a poll question there and you asked folks how many would be continuing their subscription. And not surprisingly for people that joined our Logic Pro for iPad group, 80% of folks said that they would be continuing despite the fact that it's a subscription. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that, because we did say we'd be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And let's just say that the vast majority of the bad and ugly comments and questions I've got on my Logic Pro videos, and I don't know if your experience is similar, have been about the subscription model.
Yep.
So maybe we'll circulate around to that in a little while. Let's kick off, though, with I want to get your 1 minute hot take on your personal Patrick from the GarageBand Guys experience of Logic Pro for iPad after the first 5, well, for us, 7 weeks. What have you found?
I think for anybody who was making music on iOS platform previous to this, I think it's an almost perfect music creation solution. It's probably the most well-rounded digital audio workstation on iOS at the minute. I think if you were coming from the desktop side of things, I don't know if this is really for you necessarily, and maybe perhaps not in the way that you maybe thought it would be for you. You're going to have to deal with some compromises and things like that. For me, this is pretty much, I'm sure if your audience are familiar with me, they will have seen me rant about GarageBand's limitations many times over the last few years. This pretty much fixes all of that. So I personally am quite happy.
Yeah, and that's perfect, and that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I've gone on record now as saying, because again, if the subscriptions are number one, number two has been Logic for Mac users jumping on saying this doesn't have each and every single feature of Logic on Mac. And my response to that has been a polite but slightly forceful, it's not supposed to, and it's version 1.0 of a software, and it's optimized for touch. So there's many reasons why it's not going to be Logic for Mac on the iPad. And I think because of the M1 and the M2 chips on the iPad, and for those that don't know about that, that's Apple's silicon on a chip. So that's their new chips that are all Apple and all everything integrated. Because they're running the same chips as a Mac, I think it's given people a false expectation that the apps will therefore be exactly the same. And I know when M1 first was introduced, and especially onto iPad, you and I were, well, I was definitely bullish on the fact that, this is going to mean that basically your Mac becomes an iPad and your iPad becomes a Mac and everything's universal and cross-platform and it's all good. But is the touch interface the difference there, you think, that Logic for Mac just simply couldn't come to an iPad and couldn't have all those features?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's obviously just built around a different operating system. I think that the kind of top end, the power of iPads tops out at a point well below where the most powerful Macs are. I mean, obviously the gap has closed quite a lot now with the same chipset, but you can get vastly more powerful Macs than you can iPads. I think that's maybe a factor too. I think we've talked about this previously, that you probably you think you would want a straight one-to-one port of Logic Pro for Mac on your iPad. I think in reality that wouldn't be a particularly good thing, I don't think. So the fact that it's built specifically around touch is fantastic, and probably the best version of it that Apple could have created, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, and again, as someone who is a GarageBand iOS primarily user, and I've dabbled in Cubasis and Audio Pro and other touch-based apps, and I'm also a GarageBand Mac user and Logic Pro user, but a lot less experience on those platforms. I can see where the frustrations would be that a lot of the things you can do on Logic for Mac you can't do on Logic for iPad. And I think the answer to those folks is you've already got your solution. It's like looking for a solution to a question you don't have. If you're using Logic Pro on a Mac, there's almost no reason, especially if you're using a MacBook, there's almost no reason to go to the iPad if you're looking for that additional power. If you're not, if you don't use all the additional stuff, then maybe moving to the iPad is a good idea. But it's been interesting. It's been interesting to see what folks have been saying. Lots of opinions out there for sure.
I think a lot of that's down to Apple being very Apple about it and being quite vague and not specifically saying what the use case is for it, and just allowing people to come to their own conclusions, which isn't always the best idea with something like this. If you've got a specific audience in mind, tell that audience this is for you instead of just kind of. But then I guess Apple love money, so can't really blame them for wanting to cast that net wide, can you?
Apple love money. That's the quote that I'll use in the podcast description. Like Apple loves money, Patrick, the GarageBand guides. And you said almost perfect when you were talking about it before, and I'm like, Apple will just be like, perfect, says Patrick from the GarageBand Guide. Context is everything, including all of the words is optional. Why not? So speaking of the good and the bad and what you found good, what have you found, like, if I had to ask you, what are the top 3 features or the top 3 reasons that you think people should... Again, this isn't an ad. As you said, we are not employed by Apple. We were lucky enough to get an early release copy of the software, but we're definitly not... Well, are we Apple fanboys? I don't know. I'm staring down all my
looking
Apple
at my
gear
desk.
Right
Maybe.
But what are you finding? If someone came to you and said, Patrick, why should I try Logic Pro for iPad? Why is it better than GarageBand? And what has it got to offer?
I mean, I think talking as a GarageBand iOS user specifically, who would perhaps be thinking about moving to Logic Pro for iPad. There's some boring reasons, really. Some of the options you have with Logic Pro that you don't have with GarageBand, like you can choose your sample rates, you have far more robust export settings, you can turn auto normalization off. Wow. You can export all your tracks as individual stems, which is great for collaborating with people and things like that. The built-in automation with Logic Pro is incredible. I would say 99% perfect. We need velocity automation, but apart from that, compared to what you get in GarageBand for iOS, it is vastly superior. You can kind of automate everything down to specific parameters in a third-party plugin. It's great. Trying to think. I mean,
into the beat breaker, sample alchemy.
Yeah, I mean
the beats hard.
Oh yeah, the stuff you get with it. So I mean, in terms, they've kind of brought across the idea of a sound library as well. So that's probably one of the best parts of GarageBand for iOS is that sound library, and it's been brought across and expanded wildly in Logic Pro. And the quality of the sounds and the virtual instruments are on par for the ones that are there with what you're going to get in the desktop version. So I mean, it's certainly, we'll probably talk about that a bit later on. I would say as a GarageBand, or from the standpoint as a GarageBand user, it is certainly the upgrade you were probably looking for if you'd hit that kind of skill or feature ceiling found in GarageBand for iOS.
Yeah, perfectly put, and I like that. I can't remember exact words, but yeah, all of the greatest features are the boring ones, but they're the ones that we've been clamoring onto for years, because I know you and I have both done videos and we've both polled people and asked people in different forums about what are the GarageBand or the GarageBand features that you would love to see, that you think are missing. What's missing from GarageBand? And it's always been those same things, hasn't it? It's been advanced automation. It's been having a master channel. It's been turning off auto normalization. It's been better export settings. It's been better sample and bitrate control. So all of these things are not the feature set. This is the weird thing. Like for me, I jumped in there on day one and I was super excited by all of these things, but they weren't the headlines, were they? They weren't what Apple were putting out there with the beat breaker and the sample alchemy and all the different advantages they had there. It was all about the more boring, the more basic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the good. We said we'd talk about the bad and the ugly. What do you think you've been most disappointed with? What of all the things in GarageBand? See, are you doing this? Are you making Logic Pro videos and saying the word GarageBand over and over again? My outtakes are all GarageBand at the moment. What have you been disappointed with, or what are you hearing from the community that they're disappointed with when it comes to Logic Pro?
I mean, from the community, I made the terrible mistake of frequenting the Audio Bus forum kind of during the release cycle and after release. And yeah, like lots of thousands of iOS music makers on that forum. Generally a good place to kind of collaborate and talk to people. Not always the most, or doesn't have the reputation perhaps for being the most positive place to talk about stuff. We'll just put it that way. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so some of the big things that I've seen, not just from there, but from obviously our group and things like that, is people maybe expecting an update now. So people who got the trial, the 1 month free trial on launch day, expected an update before the end of their 1 month free trial. Ignoring the fact that if you were to get a 1 month free trial starting today, you're still getting a month. It's not as if Apple had a month from to give you something during the free trial, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It's maybe a little bit kind of, I don't know if that's just an expectation that people have come upon themselves. Apple certainly haven't been very vocal about their roadmap, but yeah, that's kind of a lot of people kind of talking about when are we going to see an update, when are we going to see these features, when are we going to see flex pitch, etc. I mean, talking about flex pitch, some of the differences, some of the features that are in the desktop version that aren't in the iPad version, like flex pitch, are the kind of things that I see a lot of people talking about. Again, going back to the kind of Logic Pro for Mac users who are perhaps looking for parity between the two different versions. The fact that this iPad version doesn't include absolutely every advanced feature from Logic Pro for Mac is a lot of what I'm seeing from the community. What about you? What kind of things are you jumping out to you that people are moaning about?
Well, same sorts of things. Definitely the flex pitch, and again, that's something because coming from GarageBand iOS, that's not something that we really had at all. And because I'm not a Logic Mac, and again, I probably should have led with this, and people know this anyway that are part of this channel. Usually, I'm not a Logic for Mac professional. I don't know everything about Logic for Mac, and I didn't really know about flex pitch, and I'm actually surprised at how many people seem to use it very frequently. And that's the same with MIDI out. So the ability to export MIDI or have MIDI out functionality is another thing that I'm quite surprised that a lot of people have been talking about and been asking for, because I'm like, I didn't realize so many people were sending their MIDI from one platform to another, or were actually needing to have this functionality or using external gear. So it's been a good learning experience for me around what people are actually looking for that's maybe outside of what I do. And apart from that, I'm finding that it's all there's a lot that's there. Keyboard shortcuts. So someone mentioned that to me recently. Again, as someone who's come from GarageBand iOS, it's so good, and there's so many good things. I think I heard some guy say that Almost Perfect was how he explained Logic Pro for iPad. So I'll go with that. But yeah, I think that the number one thing is obviously, and I said we'd return to this and circle back to it, so we're not going to get away from it. For those that think they're not going to talk about the subscriptions, see, they are in Apple's pocket. How surprised were you to see that it's a subscription only model?
Quite surprised. I mean, thinking about it, I think if Apple were to have sold Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro for $200 on the App Store, I don't think that would have been particularly popular, to be honest. Yeah. I think as much as people moan about the subscription model and the fact that you're renting the software, if I was to go back to when I was learning how to create music and I had the opportunity to get my hands on what is essentially a professional music creation app for £5 a month, I would have bitten whoever was offering that's arm off. While I can understand that there's issues around you don't get to own the app, at no point do you own the app. People need to read the license agreement for any app that you download on the App Store. You don't own any apps, and at any point they could be pulled from the App Store and gone, lost in the ether forever. So all things considered, I understand this might be an unpopular take. I think it's probably the best course of action Apple could have taken. I know they talk about lowering the barrier of entry. I've heard them talk about that quite a lot. It means that more people will get involved with music production on this platform. To me, that's only going to be a good thing. And you can see the ripple effect from that with lots more desktop plugin producers now really interested in porting their plugins and their effects across to the iOS platform.
Absolutely.
Which maybe a bad take or an unpopular take, but I think the subscription model was the best option Apple could have gone for.
Yeah, I agree. I reluctantly agree. It would be the way I look at it, because I didn't think it was something that I would agree with to start with, and I've gone through a transition. And some may say, "Oh, you're just drinking the Kool-Aid, and you're accepting thing. You need to rage against the machine, John. What happened to the grunge and punk of the '90s?" Well, yeah, no, I've realised that these days I've got other more important things to worry about than what model I'm paying for. And again, that may sound blasé, and that may be like, well, okay, well, I'll never watch you or listen to you or Patrick again. So if that's the way you feel, we're very sorry. But no, I think that there are still options, and we'll talk sort of at the end of the show about GarageBand and the future of maybe some other alternatives for those that may not want Logic Pro, because there's plenty of other things that you can use. But I think you're right that there would be equal, if not greater, uproar if they were charging the $200, £200 for it, that they would have to, because it would be worth it. And I've gone on record as saying I would have paid the $200 straight up front if it was available, not only because it's my job to use these apps and to review them and to help people use them, but because I think it's worth it. I think in terms of music creation, I mean, I'm only halfway through one song creating in Logic Pro for iPad so far, so it's hard to say I'm going to use it forever. But I think that's the other part of it. Like for a lot of folks, you mentioned at the start you're helping sort of beginner and amateur level creators creating GarageBand and now in Logic Pro. That's the thing. Like, not everyone has the ability to create music all the time. And I've said there's some folks that, they've got 6 weeks holidays over summer and they can really heavily create. So why wouldn't you just subscribe to Logic Pro, create a bunch of music in 6 weeks, and then if there's a whole month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months you're not using it, just turn off the subscription. Like I do that with Netflix, and I do that with Disney and all these other platforms. It does give you some flexibility. So again, there will be people who think we're just trying to defend them, but that's been my take on this.
I've made many critical videos about Apple in the past, weeks ago, about Logic, about all its missing features. Like, no, it's not. How this works.
I know, and it doesn't matter how much. You can say one nice thing and then 9 negative takes, and then someone will say, "See, I told you,
Shill, Apple shill."
I am enjoying my Apple Magic Trackpad that I just purchased, but just quietly.
Sponsored by Apple Magic Trackpad.
See, that's the thing. One thing you will not hear, and I mean, never say never, but you don't hear any sponsored by Apple videos. Apple are not out there doing that. They're doing influencer marketing. We are part of that, but it is different from what other companies do, and I don't know whether it's just because they put themselves on a premium sort of level, but it's interesting to see that yes, they'll provide review products for us to check out from time to time, which you and I have both benefited from, and they will give us early access to software. Full disclosure on all of that, but at the same time, for all the people that tell me, again, if I was paid $1 for every person that said I was paid $1 by Apple, I'd probably be a millionaire right now. Yeah,
I wish. Absolutely. Pay me, Apple, pay me.
Well, you did say that their DAW was perfect, so
is that what I said? Is that
It was ... perfect ... That's what the review will say. All right, you did mention the update before, and this has probably been the biggest topic around the place. And my answer to a lot of people's criticisms has been, this is version 1.0. This is the very first version, and Apple famously don't do beta or beta, however you like to say it, testing outside of Apple. So apart from the 2 weeks that we got the finished product early, because it was exactly what version 1 was, there was no sort of testing outside of what Apple did themselves. So this is very much version 1.0.
Yeah.
When and what do you expect to see in terms of a first update if you were a betting man?
I think a 1.01 update, not a 1.1 update. I think it'll be that will favourite bug fixes, stability. fixing stability issues.
Stability improvements and bug fixes.
I think it's possibly likely you might see a big artist collaboration similar to what they did with Katy Perry and your favourite K-pop band 17 and GarageBand. Just to kind of, obviously they've had that big high profile launch, people have talked about it, and then it started to simmer down. I think if you were Apple, you'd want to have some form of easy win in terms of some kind of big artist collaboration to kind of bring it back up. I don't imagine in the first update we will see any massive updates to functionality. I don't think. I think it will be because there are a couple of bugs in there in terms of apps crashing and things like that. A lot of that has been dealt with third-party developers themselves, but certainly there are a few little niggles there as well that they would probably want to iron out. But I think the first update you'll get will be a version 1.01 update that will fix a few bits and pieces, and you'll be waiting a bit longer for a larger, more substantial update.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, because I think a lot of people expect Apple's first update to be, here's loads of extra stuff, enjoy. I don't think so.
Absolutely. No, that's and I'm kind of on the same path there. I think with that because I think people are expecting flex time. They're expecting all the keyboard shortcuts to come. They're expecting MIDI out, and probably want to tamper those expectations down a wee bit because personally, I don't think we're getting a whole lot of that anytime soon. But hey, we could be surprised. Maybe we'll get it all. But and it is interesting because I think a lot of people did think exactly as you said that why would they not put an update out if they want me to subscribe to this? Why would they not put an update out? Well, because I think based on the survey you did over on Facebook, there's a lot of people, I think about 10% of people said if they weren't going to subscribe, they're going to sit back and wait and watch. Yeah. So there's not that there's no hurry, but they're going to get a bunch of subscriptions. They will already have a bunch of people subscribed for the month and for the year. So they're probably going to sit back and make sure that they do this slowly. It's very much an iterative process. And I'm getting the vibe that the fact that it took this long after the M1, if you think of how long the M1 iPad was out before the M2 iPad came out, before Logic Pro Touch came out, it could be a bit of a long ride. So it sounds like we're Debbie Downers here today, doesn't it? We're like, don't expect anything good. It's all it's again, it is. It's almost. They
should have paid us, Pete. Apple should have paid us. Would be far more positive.
Could have been beat.
Could have just been realistic, I think. I mean, obviously we know how this update cycle works. We've been working with GarageBand for years. It's the same on the desktop with Logic updates and GarageBand updates. You get a big, massive one once, twice a year maybe, and that's it. I don't imagine that timescale is going to change any on the iPad for Logic Pro. Yeah,
absolutely. I like it. So that brings me to pretty much the final topic that we have here. So you are the GarageBand guide, I would like to say. And this is Logic Pro for iPad. So it's a different bit of software. But what does this mean for your... I mean, obviously, GarageBand on Mac has survived with Logic Pro Mac for a very long time. They are two different bits of software, and they live in perfect harmony. So now that we have GarageBand iPad and Logic Pro iPad, what does this mean for GarageBand? What's the future look like for GarageBand on iOS?
That's dreadful. Just delete it now. Why bother? No.
Get rid of it now.
No one was more surprised than me in this last 5 weeks. The amount of people who either aren't interested in picking up Logic Pro or have tried it but are happy sticking with GarageBand on iOS to create music with. The two apps are joined together, or they work together really well, so you can start a project in GarageBand and move it across to Logic Pro if you want to. So I don't think GarageBand's going to go anywhere. I think the biggest factor I've seen when speaking to people about why they still want to incorporate GarageBand into their workflow is the fun factor. One that is fully featured and as great as Logic Pro is, it is a more professional digital audio workstation, and in that regard, it's perhaps, you could say, slightly less fun to create music on it. Whereas GarageBand is all about accessibility. It's all about getting your hands on that iPad or on that iPhone and creating music. And it is, by its nature, a lot more fun. So, and again, talking about beginners and things like that, yes, I mean, Logic Pro for iPad is quite accessible. It isn't as accessible as GarageBand. I think you're still going to get a lot of people starting their music creation journey on an iPad or an iPhone with GarageBand, and you'd be daft not to, because it is probably without doubt the best way to introduce yourself to this type of workflow. Speaking again about what you mentioned there about GarageBand on Mac and Logic Pro on Mac, I think what Apple have done here quite cannily is replicate that stepping stone system that they have on the Mac. So you will start on Mac, you start off with GarageBand. It comes free with every single Mac. And then when you hit that feature ceiling, when you get to the point where you want to do things within that program that it's not capable of, they have a clear upgrade path to Logic Pro on Mac. And it's exactly the same on the iPad now. You start off with GarageBand, you get to a point where you kind of want to turn off normalization when you export your projects, or you want to automate your panning or something like that. You now have a Apple-made premium app that you can then move on to when you're ready to. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay in a lot of people's music making workflow, I think.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And look, I call GarageBand iOS my spirit animal. I've been using it for 7 years, and I've been using Logic Pro for 1 month. So it is my comfort zone. So going back to it and creating music in the last few weeks has been that. So I've been doing a lot of tutorials on Logic Pro. I've been creating some music on Logic Pro. But every time I step back into GarageBand, it is like I'm going home, and it's nice visiting Logic Pro, but going home is always nice. So my home at this point is still GarageBand. I think you're right, similar to what we have on the Mac, and similar to iMovie to Final Cut Pro. Apple have now got the perfect quinella for both of those, that if you're a video creator, you can start in iMovie for free on every Apple device you buy anywhere. So any iPad, any iPhone, any Mac is going to have iMovie on it. And now when you move up your iPad, your Mac, it's going to have Final Cut Pro, and it's going to have Logic Pro. So yeah, it makes absolute sense, and it's very, very smart to go that way. But again, some people will say yes, but it's a subscription, and we get it. But feel free, jump down to the comments right now, because I would love to hear your comments. I'm a bit baffled by the amount of people that are still in the videos. Like, we've been 5 weeks in here, and they're still on the latest video telling me that they don't like the subscription. I'm like, I mean, to be very nice about it, there's basically one sentence you should say about that, which is, subscriptions aren't for me, therefore Logic Pro is not for me right now. Goodbye. So I'm not sure why you're in video number 7 that Patrick and I have released and still telling us about how you don't like subscriptions. But hey, there are people that like Windows that come into our videos and tell us why that we shouldn't be using Macs and shouldn't be using iOS at all. So it's just the way it kind of goes, isn't it? So, interesting stuff, and I did want to thank you again for your time here on the show today. And if people do have questions for you or for me, you're watching on the video version, jump down into the comment section below, ask all of your hard questions, tell us your opinions, your thoughts, what's good, what's bad, all the rest of it. And you can, of course, jump over and find Patrick at thegaragebandguide.com and GarageBand Guide here on YouTube, as well as, I did say there was a tease right up the front. Something new coming from you, Patrick. Would you like to completely non-exclusively, because I know by the time this podcast is released, it'll already be out in the world.
Hopefully,
would you like? It'll look really weird if it's just a link to a blank, but the old construction site from the 90s of the under construction, like the workman little thing. Yeah, that'd be cool. What have you got? What do you got cooking? What's coming around the corner for Patrick?
So, yeah, I've been creating Logic Pro content just like you have, but I've been putting it on the GarageBand Guide YouTube channel. And while there are a lot of my audience on the GarageBand Guide who are interested and who have moved across to Logic Pro for iPad, it seems a bit strange to have content about a different app on a channel that's focused on another app. So I had a couple of options, choices. I could have changed the channel completely, rebranded, and got rid of all the GarageBand stuff. But as we just talked about, GarageBand isn't going anywhere, and I would be a complete moron to do that. So instead, I've created a new YouTube channel, which, as you say, will be launched by the time this podcast goes out, that is focused around tutorials and content using and creating music with Logic Pro for iPad. Thinking about coming up a name for this, a long, hard time about thinking I want to be innovative. I want it to be innovative and come up with something catchy that hadn't really been seen before. So I eventually, after a lot of brainstorming, I came up with the name The Logic Pro Guide. So yeah, very much the same, in the same vein as the GarageBand guide, where it'll be tutorials and videos showing you how to get to grips with Logic Pro for iPad, with more of a focus on the community involvement and me creating content around what they want to see. So yeah, that should be live right now, I think.
Very cool. In fact, jump down in the description and find out if Patrick is telling the truth or if he's completely dropped the ball on this one. No,
on the construction page, absolutely.
Under construction page, yeah. Little yellow and white. You want it yellow and black. No, that is super cool. And again, some people may be looking at this going, Johns, you realise that's what you do as well. Why on earth have you got Patrick on your channel talking about a Logic Pro channel when you're creating Logic Pro? Look, this is what we've been doing for a long time here, and I'm a true believer in the whole high tide raises all ships, and I love the fact that Patrick, that Dan Baker, that Colin, that there's so many people out there that are creating a bunch of really good content around GarageBand, around Logic Pro, around mobile creating. We've got Vortex over at Mobile Music Pro, we've got Jade Star, we've got so many people creating so much good content, and it'll be different for different folks. There are some people that just will listen to Patrick just for his accent for hours on end. They just can't get enough of that Scottish drawl. And then there's some people that are like, oh, let's go listen to see what Johns is ranting about. He'll probably go off on 14 tangents before he actually gets to the point. But so however you like your content delivered, whether you like it Australian style or UK style or anything else, you can find it on online. And it's been wonderful as always having you on the podcast and on the show here again. It's always great to get together and chat about all things GarageBand, all things. Now, how do you pronounce Logic Pro? Are there two pronunciations for that, or is it Logic?
It's Logic Pro for iPad. But yeah, I've tried to kind of change the pronunciation so that more people can understand me. Yeah, so.
I love it. Well, yes, whatever Apple software you use, whether it be GarageBand or Logic, do check out Patrick and his new home.
Thank you.
The Logic Pro. I'm not going to be able to get my head around that. I'm not going to be able to remember. How am I going to remember that name? It's so out there. It's so different.
It's crazy.
Love it a lot. Do indeed go and check that out. Jump down the description as well. If you're listening on the podcast version, on the audio version, you missed our shining faces and you missed my amazing Logic Pro hat that I had printed out by Vistaprint just because I wanted to confuse people and make them think, is that a genuine Apple product? And no,
I've
it's 100%
just noticed
not.
that. Apple are paying you, aren't they? Wow.
No, may or may not have had a few beverages one night with my wife and thought of interesting things to put on a hat, and me being the most boring man in the history of the world, I'm like, I'll put Logic Pro on a hat. That'll be hilarious. So if you want to see my amazing Logic Pro hat and you want to see Patrick's awesome 90s dance club background, jump on over to the video version. That's going to be at studiolive.com or Studio Live Today on the YouTubes. Patrick, any final parting words for our wonderful folks here on this week's show?
Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much, Pete, for having me. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
Very cool indeed. Thank you again for listening. This has been the Studio Live Today podcast. You can find more information, as always, at studiolivetoday.com. And as we say at the end of each and every show here on Studio Live Today, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Keep creating in Logic Pro. We'll see you next time.